Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 45 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep into the night here on a Sunday evening into Monday in the middle of July, and it is officially the All-Star break in Major League Baseball. We are part of the Foul Territory Podcast Network. In this space, we cover the Atlanta Braves. If you are a new listener, welcome aboard to the podcast. Usually, this is not a solo endeavor, but for some context, I will be solo on today's podcast. It was not planned to be that way. In fact, it's like 1:30 a.m. Eastern Time right now. The plan was for myself and Scott Coleman, my usual co-host, to be recording in this hour. Part of that was my fault. I am in Las Vegas covering the Atlanta Hawks at NBA Summer League, so there was going to be a scheduled late recording. But then Scott, who lives in Arizona, was hit with a very, very large weather storm, basically. And that led to power outages and all kinds of challenges. We've been texting back and forth, and ultimately the choice was basically having to be made that it was going to be solo podcast or no podcast tonight. And given that this is our usual recording slot, it's Monday morning tomorrow, etc., I'm going solo, and we'll have much, much more content coming up later this week. Some trade deadline stuff for sure, some previewing of the second half and all of that fun stuff. But in the absence of Scott, I will do my best on a solo podcast on this Sunday evening. So basically, it's already been a very busy week on this podcast network. I definitely encourage you to subscribe to this podcast on Apple or Spotify, Overcast, etc., and check out all of Foul Territory. I know we've been talking about that quite a bit recently, but they went live during the MLB draft on this Sunday evening. There's a lot going on there, so check us out, subscribe, and tell your friends. Overall, it was a quality weekend for the Atlanta Braves. Essentially, the big headliner at the Major League level was 2 wins in 3 games against San Diego on the road, including a very nice win on Sunday afternoon/evening to enter the break with good vibes, basically. The Braves go 4-3 on this West Coast road trip, and they're now 6-3 in the last 9 games as the first half, quote-unquote, comes to an end. We always joke about this, but the first half is not actually the first half. The Braves have already played 95 games so far in a 162-game schedule, so it's not quite in the middle, but first half, second half is kind of the traditional nomenclature referring to the All-Star break, so here we are. And at the top here, we'll just say this. The Braves are 53-42, which is obviously pretty good. It's like a 90-91 win pace. Many teams would be thrilled with that kind of pace. Unfortunately, the Braves are not one of them, and they have been underachieving to this point. The way that I have it written in the notes is that this is maybe the least impressive or least galvanizing 53-42 stretch in all of modern baseball history. I'm joking about that, but still it might actually be that way. Still, though, the Braves are in pretty good shape. As we'll get into later on, the results have been pretty reasonable in recent days, but they're now 8.5 games back of the Phillies and solidly at number 1 in the overall wildcard race. As actually Scott pointed out to me offline earlier today, the Braves would basically be within striking distance of any other division in the National League. They would only be about a game and a half behind the Brewers and 3 games behind the Dodgers. But unfortunately for Atlanta, Philadelphia has been fantastic this season. They did lose in pretty epic fashion on Sunday to Oakland, which was kind of a nice way, again, to kind of improve the vibes for the Braves side going into the break. But still, that's the reason why the deficit is so large is partially because the Braves have underachieved, but also the Phillies have been fantastic so far, unfortunately, for Atlanta. Still, the Braves have like 92% playoff odds, according to Fangraphs, and that was even coming into today when the Braves won. So let's just say it will be a big surprise to everyone around baseball if the Braves do not end up in the playoffs at some point and in some fashion. In the division, we all know the deal now at this point. It's not over by any means, but the Braves are underdogs there, etc., etc. But still, a good way to end the first half. We'll kind of come back to that when it comes to the game-by-game outlook. But we'll kind of dive in a little bit now here at the top of the podcast to how the weekend went for the Braves. Of course, in between episodes, I did a show that I kind of put in the can before I started traveling with Carlos Collazo at Baseball America about the MLB draft. We'll come back to that later on as well because that was part of a very busy weekend for the Braves. But the Braves did lose on Thursday quickly, and we'll come back to that in a second. But Friday's game was about Spencer Schwellenbach. So he was very, very good once again against a quality lineup in San Diego. 7 innings, 3 hits, only 1 run allowed, 1 walk, and 3 strikeouts. That was the second straight fantastic start for Schwellenbach. And in his last six outings, as a rookie who never pitched in AAA, 35 innings, 32 strikeouts, 7 walks, an ERA of 3.34, and a FIP of 2.94. Now, that's not a huge sample size, but still, that is incredibly impressive. We are certainly high on him. The guys at Foul Territory had him on their show, and that was in their feed as well, if you want to find the podcast version of that, of just Spencer talking to those guys. But he's a great story, a guy everybody seems to like. He's pitching extremely well right now, which was certainly the headliner of Friday's game. Elsewhere, though, on the offensive side of things, Ozuna homered twice in that game, and in the process set the franchise record for RBI before the All-Star break. Again, the break's not always in the same spot, so there's a little bit of an asterisk there, but he has been unbelievably good so far this season. And on Friday, a hat tip to Orlando Arcia, who has struggled mightily this year. He has a 57 WRC plus. That's not a misprint. A 57 WRC plus for the season and a 577 OPS. But he did homer on Friday. That was his first home run since early June. And hopefully a sign of more things to come, because he has some pop in the bat. It's not going well this year at all. We kind of know that right now. We talked about this endlessly in the last couple of weeks, and we probably still will even more for the rest of July. That was a nice moment for Orlando on Friday. Saturday's game was the not fun one, let's just say, over the weekend, a 4-0 loss. It was their 5th time in the last 36 games that the Braves have been shut out. That's not a great run, of course, after famously avoiding shutouts quite a bit for basically a calendar year. They had a shutout loss on Thursday and then another one on Saturday. This time it was Dylan Cease, who's obviously a high-level pitcher who has a big-time sort of record of success, but still 11 strikeouts. He was fantastic in that game for San Diego. Ronaldo Lopez has not been perfect in recent days. You know, the regression monster was always going to be coming for Ronaldo, who is, of course, heading to the All-Star game, but he was BABIP'd to death, I would say, on Saturday. He had a 457 BABIP allowed and 11 hits allowed, including 9 singles. He wasn't just torched. It just wasn't his day, and that was kind of to be expected on some level, as he was just so riding high in his first 10, 12, 13 starts of the season. I will also say, though, given the bigger theme of Saturday was the shortcomings of the offense, it's sort of a good time to point out that Matt Olson, who, of course, I am a fan of. Matt Olson went to my high school, just to be open about that. I am much older than he is, so we're not like friends or anything like that. But Matt, I think, has had this weird trajectory this year where early in the year, he really was struggling and getting a lot of attention for it. And it seemed like people didn't quite understand that he came out of that and actually was pretty good in the months of May and June. But then now, I would say until this weekend, maybe people were kind of not figuring out he's been pretty cold so far in the month of July. And broadly speaking, and Scott teased this on Twitter before we knew what he was going to have to be dealing with tonight, and he wasn't going to be available to be on the show, that it's kind of time to talk about this because Matt Olson just has to be better for the Braves. He is, of course, not alone. To be fair, most members of the offense this year have not been what you would expect. I think it's still accurate, probably right now, to argue that only 2 guys in the opening day lineup have been as good or better than you would have projected, and that is Ozuna and Jared Kelenic. Yes, Austin Riley has been back to his normal self in recent days, but because he had such a slow start, his overall production in the first half is still well below what you would expect. Albies, same thing. Michael Harris, same thing. Adam Duvall, et cetera, Sean Murphy. I guess Darno's been pretty good too, but he's obviously a part-time player. And then Olson has not been what Olson has to be. And essentially, he's going into the break with like a 65 WRC plus over the last 4 or 5 weeks. It's below 100 for the season. He had a 4-game hitless stretch that he broke on Sunday with a single that was actually needed on Sunday. But Matt's peripherals are not as good as they usually are either. He has his lowest walk rate of his career to this point. Also, his highest strikeout rate since becoming a full-time player in 2018, if you remove the 2020 season, which of course was the shortened one. His batted ball data is still better than his actual numbers. So there's some encouragement in that, but I will also say, while acknowledging that his batted ball data at StatCast, like how hard he's hitting the ball, all those underlying metrics, is much worse than it was a year ago. And, it's worth acknowledging, last year he was an MVP level player. He finished top 4 MVP. In a normal season, he would have probably been firmly in the mix, but of course Acuna and Betts were unbelievable. But Olson, 54 home runs, whatever it was, like franchise records, he was truly superstar level a year ago. But there's some actually like some quote-unquote every other year stuff going on with Matt Olson's profile. I'm not sure how real that is or why that would happen to be, but it actually is true for his entire career to this point in time. For example, In 2017, he made his triumphant arrival in Oakland and was awesome. In 2018, he was pretty good again, but it was not quite as good as the year before. Then he had a step up in 2019 where he was very, very good. And then in 2020, in the shortened season, he actually had a pretty middling season. He was fine, pretty good even, but not the same guy. Then in 2021, he was flat out excellent in Oakland. Then he was back to being pretty good in 2022. Last year, he was MVP level, and then this year he's back down. So maybe it's just randomness. It's probably randomness, but it's one of those things where I'm not sure where the baseline level is. I will say two things here. I already acknowledged this. Matt Olson's got to be better. He isn't alone on that. That's number one. Number two is, I think if you asked me, is he going to be better than he was in the first half? I have pretty good confidence that he will be better in the second half, because while Olson is not, I just acknowledged, like, he's not been the same kind of superstar every year. It's been every other year, basically. But even in his quote-unquote down seasons, like, for instance, his first year with the Braves, he was still pretty darn good. He just wasn't as good as he had been in other seasons. This year, he's been pretty mid, and that's okay to say. But I think at the same time, he has a record that is long enough, and he's not like 35 years old. Like, there's not really a reason to assume he's going to suddenly be a different guy. So all that to say, it is worth acknowledging Matt's shortcomings in recent days and also for the season on the whole. At the same time, I'm not panicking about it, even if I think people are rightly worried about the way it's gone so far, because as you know, one of the top 3 or 4 guys on the roster at a bare minimum, and with a team that's currently without Ronald Acuna Jr., of course, Olson being a star is a big part of this, along with Riley and others, but everybody else has to be really good, and he's not been really good this year. He's been fine. He's been a productive enough hitter at times, but in recent days, he's been pretty bad, and for the season, he has been fully mid in a way that they cannot afford, so there you go on that. To the game on Sunday, and of course, the final game of the first half for the Braves, a 6-3 victory. Chris Sale was good, as he seemingly always is for the Braves. Only won 5 innings in the game on Sunday. He threw 79 pitches. There were questions about that. You know, as soon as that happened, like, what's going on here? Why is he coming out of the game? And after the game, Brian Snitker was pretty candid about it and said they were not going to let him go past 5 innings no matter what happened, basically. They agreed before the start, and they considered even skipping him in general. Sale, you know, you can certainly argue all sides of this, but they realigned him to be pitching on Sunday, which made him automatically ineligible to pitch in the All-Star game. He's been there before, so I'm not sure it was a huge priority for him to be able to pitch in the All-Star game. But that was intentional and noticed by many people. And then he was on a short leash today. And by the way, I am totally fine with this, because Chris Sale, while he's been incredible this year, I would argue he has been the best pitcher in the National League. In fact, he ends the first half with like a 2.70 ERA, and even better than that peripheral-wise. He's leading the National League in Fangraphs WAR for pitchers, as well as FIP and some other categories. He's got like 5.5 strikeouts per 9 innings, strikeouts to walks, I should say, this season. So it's he's been incredible. With that said, we all understand his record of injury concerns, and while Scott and I, in particular, along with Steven and Sean, we all bang the drum in the winter that Chris Sale has never, ever been bad. He's only been really good or hurt, nothing in between. I think it's prudent to manage him a little bit, and that doesn't mean you shut him down early. Like, obviously, he's a veteran, he knows his body, but if the pitcher and the team come to an agreement today and say, all right, 5 innings is good, take it easy, take this next week off, etc. Makes sense to me, and it's all about prolonging and having him ready to go in October. The Braves are in a pennant race, we all understand that, but they need to have Fried, they need to have Sale in particular, and then throw in Lopez in there, Morton, who's 40 years old. Getting to the playoffs with at least 3 or 4 of your guys ready to go on the mound is paramount, as we've seen the last couple of years for the Braves. So he was awesome. Chris Sale is maybe one of the, if not the biggest story of the first half for the Braves. You could, of course, acknowledge the injury stuff with Ronnie and Spencer, the way they've underperformed. But on the positive side, Sale, Lopez, Ozuna are like the breakout, fantastic stories. And Sale, given what the Braves traded for him, what the Braves are paying him, the way he has pitched, you can argue he's a Cy Young frontrunner right now. He's certainly in the top 3 or 4 in Cy Young running at the All-Star break, and it's been incredible from him to this point. The other big story on Sunday was Travis Darno. So the Braves won this game 6-3, and he was responsible for a lot of the offense. Number one, he stole his first base since 2020. That's a long time ago. That is 4 years ago. And then after he stole the base, he scored on an Adam Duvall single to break a 1-1 tie. So that was a big, big moment in itself. Then he had the biggest swing of the game with a 3-run homer shortly after that. And then he hit another home run in the 8th. I have said this many, many times, so forgive me if you are a recurring listener to the podcast, but having Travis Darno be your second best catcher is a ridiculous situation because Travis Darno would be the best catcher on probably 15 teams in the league. And then also Sean Murphy is a star. So the Braves have, as I've said many times, I believe they have the best catching situation in all of baseball when you consider the depth. Murphy's been pretty good lately after a slow start and the injury. Darno is really, really good in the number 2 role, but he was the clear star even in a game when Sale was awesome. Darno hitting 2 home runs and stealing the base, and there were all kinds of funny quotes after the game about Darno swiping that bag, and that was a funny moment too. So it was certainly a good way to end the quote-unquote first half, go in with positive vibes, and you can sort of overstate how much that matters to go into a break like this that's a full 4 days off. The Braves don't play again until Friday. And to end that on a good note in San Diego, everybody gets on their own, flights back to wherever they're going for their break for 4 days. Certainly a good time to have a nice win, and it was sort of not comfortable, but a solid enough win on Sunday. All right, before we get out of here, a look briefly at the other big topic from Sunday evening, and that was the MLB draft. So I said this with Carlos on the preview show. Number one, Carlos and I have a long history together as former co-hosts of a podcast together, but he's also arguably the number one draft analyst in the country. He was on the MLB draft broadcast on MLB Network on Sunday. It was good to have him on just because of how good he is, but also because I don't know much about these guys. I will always acknowledge that. With that said, I have lots of friends, people that I trust, and the Braves made 2 picks on Sunday. First of all, they drafted Cam Caminiti at number 24 overall, a 6'2 pitcher from Scottsdale, actually near my co-host's neck of the woods in Arizona. He's committed to LSU, 17 years old still. He's the cousin of former Brave and former NL MVP Ken Caminiti, RIP to him. It's just kind of a surprise on some level. Not in a bad way, in fact, because Caminiti was a top 15, 17 guy on almost all of the national boards. I think he was 13th at ESPN, 15th at Pipeline, 17th at Baseball America. Some people believe that I trust, that, and they wrote this tonight, that he might have been the best high school pitcher in the entire class. And for him to fall to the Braves at 24 was a surprise in a good way. It could be an overslot contract that won't be known just yet, at least that I've seen. But all signs are good that they'll be able to sign him, hopefully, and then we'll see what happens from there. But he can ramp it up to 98 by all accounts from the left side, is a tremendous athlete by all accounts as well. The guys I trust at BatteryPower.com, Garrett Spain, Matt Powers, people like Carlos, people I was reading on the internet that, again, I trust, seem to all be in agreement. This is a really encouraging pick. I will never tell you that I know things, and the baseball draft is much more random and difficult to project than other drafts might be. But certainly a high upside bet on a guy who has clear talent as a 17-year-old lefty who can throw that hard with multiple offerings that are high level. That's really, really encouraging. And also, this is the 5th straight time the Braves have used a first-round pick on a pitcher. So they are certainly not averse to doing that. It's been mixed results, but certainly they are not afraid of going ahead and do that. And of course, last year it was a college arm in Waldrop. This time around, a very, very young high school pitcher with considerable upside. The Rays also took, with their second pick of the day, another lefty, Carter Holton from Vanderbilt, at number 62 overall. He's undersized lefty, but has really good stuff by all accounts. He could be a reliever long term. That's kind of a TBD based on what I've read so far. He was projected mostly in that range. And the last thing is, I talked about this with Carlos a little bit on that preview show, but the Braves are always good for a local product. And while Holton is not from Atlanta, he is from Savannah, which is 3.5, 4 hours away. And not a huge surprise. The Braves were going to go back into Georgia and pick a guy they like there. So that's the draft so far. There's still much more to come on the draft. Again, we'll probably have somebody come on to talk about it that knows more about these prospects than we do on this show. But I wanted to at least get that overview because it was obviously a big topic on Sunday evening. Elsewhere, news-wise, before we sign off, I said it before, but Sale's not playing in the All-Star game. They did get another guy in there, though. Max Fried was added in the last couple days as a replacement after a very strong first half. He, of course, had a pretty hideous start to the season, but has recovered very nicely to having a 3.08 ERA in 18 starts. Max is one of the best 12 pitchers in baseball, something like that. He is fantastic. He still remains underrated. He's just always good. Also, a bit of news here, or maybe not news, like history stuff. Mark Bowman had this, but this is the first time the Braves have had 3 pitchers in the All-Star game since 2011 with Jair Jurgens, Johnny Venters, and Craig Kimbrell. That's been a long time. And their first time with 3 starting pitchers in the game because it's, Sale got announced, like he's not going to pitch, but Sale, Lopez, and Fried. First time since Maddox, Glavine, and Denny Nagel in 1997. So that's a long time ago. Pretty impressive stuff there, and it goes to say, for as disappointing as the Braves' bats have been on the whole this year in the non-Ozuna division of things, the pitching has been that good to be able to have the Braves still be in the position that they are in on the way to 90-plus wins, perhaps, etc. Some more update stuff here. Ian Anderson made a rehab start in Rome over the weekend. Apparently looked okay, not dominant, but was at least out there. AJ Smith-Shawver pitched on Sunday in Gwinnett. Velocity was good there. He, of course, made the interesting roster appearance in the last few days, but we'll kind of reset that later on. And then we are planning to do some sort of trade deadline preview episode content in the next few days because, of course, there's no baseball happening. We'll kind of talk about the actual team stuff as well, but it's kind of a good time to reset. The deadline is July 30th, so as I'm recording this podcast, 15 days from now, so 2 weeks basically, and plenty to get to on that because the Braves have some questions. Like they're not urgent things compared to some other teams, but they certainly could use another outfielder, maybe a shortstop, maybe some more pitching, as all teams need more pitching, so keep an eye on that. We'll have some preview content coming up in the next few days on that. And yeah, the All-Star break is here. So as a reminder, if you don't know this, Monday is the Home Run Derby. Marcell Ozuna is participating in that event. Tuesday is the game. No Sale, but Fried, Lopez, and Ozuna in the mix there. And then 5 days from now, on Friday, the Braves open the second half with 6 straight home games against the Cardinals and the Reds. Again, that's not till Friday. We'll preview that later on this week, but that's kind of the rundown as it is right now. Hopefully this was not too painful to listen to on a Monday at some point in your commute or wherever you might be listening to this podcast, at work, etc. One more time, please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you find podcasts. If you're a new listener, this is 95% of the time a co-host operation. Either myself and Scott Coleman, also Stephen Tolbert and Sean Coleman, or guests, or some combination of all of that. Occasionally we have to do a solo show because of just timing. Right now it's just too late in the evening for me to try to wake up Stephen Tolbert or Sean Coleman to hop on with me. But go ahead and subscribe. We are part of Foul Territory. Check those guys out as well. Apple, Spotify, etc. It would do wonders for us. If you are already listening to the show, first of all, thank you for doing that. Second of all, it would help us tremendously if you would share this podcast with a friend of yours, or 2 or 3 or family members or whatever. Share it on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Send in an email to somebody that you might know. Text somebody that is a Braves fan that you might know in your life. Hey, check out this podcast. That'd be huge. We'd definitely appreciate that. Please just keep listening. We'd definitely appreciate that as well. And enjoy the All-Star break. We'll have much more content coming up later on this week, and we'll see you all next time.